Hey guys, we are finally here. I know last week we had a nice polished entry. It was live from Coldwell Banker. It's Facebook live, but this morning we were trying to go live and we were having technical difficulties, but here we are. And as promised, we have our Queen of Foreclosures. So Dawn Belville, we talked her into joining us this morning. A lot of people have questions and just general curiosity about foreclosures, but it's a business of its own, I would say. And so we were excited when Dawn was willing to spend the morning with us and talk a little bit with us about what life is like as the Queen of Foreclosures. So,
and we're in a little different setting.
Sure, we are. Mm-hmm. We are in the car today. We have discovered over the years that some of our very best conversations happen in the car while we're going on office tour, checking properties, whatever it may be. And so we thought, well, you know, this is a very comfortable place to be, and we could also turn on the overhead lights to help shine on Dawn's crown. But nonetheless, so we are in the car this morning, and we think that kind of contributed to the technical difficulties getting started. But nonetheless, we're here. It looks like you guys can actually see us, so perfect. And as you guys watch this, if you have questions, go ahead, type them. It looks like we can see things. So, Dawn, tell us what it is like to be the Queen of Foreclosures. What's a typical day like for you?
It is busy. A lot of times, I do a lot of traveling. Driving around, I go within a 100-mile radius of Manhattan, so I see a lot of the countryside. So on days you guys are bored, you're welcome to come along. But it is, it's a kind of an exciting thing because I see a little bit of everything, from the kind of houses you don't even want to step into to some that you go into, and I've had people leave cleaning receipts where they've had the carpets cleaned, the house cleaned, and it's like, hey, this is all right. So it's a little bit of everything.
So to touch on that, so the homes that you visit, they actually are on a spectrum as far as how move-in ready or how cared for they've been?
Oh yeah, I've had them where we have sold them from $5,000 to $300,000, so it's a wide spectrum.
Okay.
I always like to say some of them need a little TLC.
Yeah.
And my office has kind of joked, and we kind of said that means termites love company.
Or tons of loose cash. I think we've heard you say that one too, in addition to the termites. So you mentioned you cover a 100-mile radius. How far have you traveled, though, for
I think the furthest one I had, which was, I can't even remember the name of the little town, but it was 4 miles from the Nebraska border. Drove all the way up there, and the house was about to fall in. So I think we sold it for like $7,000 or $8,000, and I had to travel up there several times. So kind of lost some money on that deal.
One thing, kind of a side note, when we think about Dawn and driving everywhere, Dawn typically does not take her regular vehicle. You actually have a separate vehicle for your foreclosures.
I do. I normally, if I'm showing in that to a typical buyer or working with a seller, I have an SUV that I drive. But if I'm checking my foreclosures, I have a little S15 pickup that gets a good gas mileage, so it works.
Yep. Important. Always, exactly. Especially when you're going that far.
So when you make your rounds, or in the years that you've been making your rounds, what has been the most memorable thing that's happened to you?
I would say probably the kind of scariest thing was I had a house up in Idana, which is kind of by Clay Center, and I had knocked on the door and these 2 big dogs hit the window, and so I started to back up, and somebody in the house let him out and said, get her, and so I was actually attacked by a dog and ended up having to go to the hospital. So that was probably the scariest, but even when the sheriff came, they tried to get me to sign a paper to have the dog put down, and I'm a dog lover. Everybody knows my little assistant, Lucky. So I could not even do that, but the guy did volunteer to turn the dogs over, so there wasn't a court case. But that was probably the scariest, other than there have been times I've went to the wrong house or walked in the wrong house if there was a West Street and an East Street. But
I feel like there's a rite of passage as a realtor that I feel like
all done that.
Every realtor, if you haven't gone to the wrong house, you just haven't been in the business long enough.
In fact, when I think about it, just this week, I went to the wrong house and my buyers were like, Bria, isn't it that one? I'm like, oh, yes, it is. So, yeah.
Part of it.
So, why did you decide to start dealing with foreclosures?
I'm not sure if it was really a decision. When I first got into real estate, I had the broker at that time kind of took me under her wing, and she got busy and just asked me one time to help her. And I said, okay, sure. And I did it. And she had always complained about it. And I thought, well, that's not so bad. So the next one came in and she said, do you want this? And then it just kind of got to where I noticed I was getting them and she wasn't anymore. So it just kind of became like my niche in the market. A lot of people don't like it because there is a lot of paperwork. When I work with Fannie Mae, and by the time we do a contract, it ends up 26 to 28 pages. So it's a lot more hassle, and I even have a lot of agents in town that will just call me and refer their buyers to me because they just don't want to deal with the paperwork and the hassle. But it's just got to where I know the ins and outs of Fannie Mae because that's who I deal with the most. And it's kind of funny that agents will call me and say, I don't understand this. Can you walk me through it? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's so easy. But then when I deal with with VA or HUD and I have to call that agent, they're probably going, oh my gosh, this is so easy. So it's just kind of what you get used to.
Yeah, because there's so much in detail, and each company is different that you work with, like repairs or, kind of what they'll allow and...
Right. And most of the times, if it's lender required, I know with Fannie Mae, they will do repairs. They say they don't, but if it's lender required, they do, but they always reserve the right to add that back to the sales price if that's what needs to be done. But most of the time, they'll do them if it's reasonable, or they'll split the cost.
So now that we're kind of starting to segue into how foreclosures work, I'm going to ask you some questions that come from like a seller's perspective, a buyer's perspective, because obviously, we kind of have an insight as to foreclosures involve a lot of paperwork. Dawn spends a lot of time getting these homes ready. She checks them every week, but what's it like for the consumer? So from a consumer's perspective, how does the foreclosure process begin? Like, how does this even happen?
From the owner standpoint, once you get behind on a payment, a lot of times people think I get that first letter and I'm really in trouble. Once you go 30 days, you're going to get a nasty little letter. You go 60 days, it's going to say we're going to accelerate. In Kansas, they can't really start the foreclosure process until you're 90 days past due. So a lot of times if you get to that 90 days, if you can just make up one payment, you're going to save yourself a little bit of time. But, I always tell people, too, it's amazing to me when I go to a foreclosure that it's never been on the market if I pull up the history, and, people don't even try to sell. They just get that letter, and they think, oh, my gosh, I'm in trouble. And a lot of people just abandon the property and go, where a lot of times you can call the bank, and they might reduce your interest rate. They might add some money onto the back of the loan. People think the banks want these houses back to sell them and make money, but they really don't want them back. They would prefer you call them and work something out and keep making the payments.
Because you've helped people avoid foreclosure, too.
My favorite story on that was I had a gentleman in Walmago. He was 80-some years old. He had borrowed against his house to help his kids buy a house and was not able to make the payments, and the kids couldn't make it. And I went and talked to him, and he was 80-some years old, sleeping on the floor, had boxes packed and didn't know where to go. And I got numbers for him, and he called, and they reduced his interest rate, and he stayed in his home.
How cool.
Yeah. I think that's such an important thing because, even though you're, foreclosures is what you do, you also are still about helping people as much as you can.
Oh, yeah, and I've had times when I was supposed to do an eviction at Christmas time, and I got to one house, and these kids come running out, and we're so excited that, they had company for Christmas, and I just told the bank that the people weren't home, and I couldn't serve the notice, and I came back after the first of the year, so. Yeah. Even though I do a lot of eviction posting on the doors, I still have a heart.
Sure.
True. So, and a foreclosure isn't anything we ever want people to find themselves in because it's a long, complicated process. Even as your office mate, I still don't understand foreclosures at all. So if you receive that letter, you're now 90 days out past your last payment. What happens after those 90 days? It sounds like that's
they will start that foreclosure process, and they will schedule what they call a sheriff's sale, which is when the bank... Basically, it's usually on the steps of the courthouse, and 9 times out of 10, the bank will buy it back. But once in a while, there is somebody that wants the property that will pay more than the bank. But the bank will buy it back. That takes several months. Once you get a foreclosure notice, depending on the bank you're working with, it could be anywhere from 3 months to a year before it's finally done. Even once they have the sale, you then have what they call a 90-day redemption period where you can still redeem the property by paying back everything that's owed. Or you could possibly sell it. If it's on the market and you get an offer, you could go ahead and sell it. But when they say 90 days, they mean 90 days. It's not 90 days in 1 minute. So by midnight on that 90th day, it has to close. So you could still possibly sell it if you can get an offer on it within that redemption, and that will stop the foreclosure.
Okay.
And a lot of people that's probably kind of surprising to them that if you are in foreclosure, you can still sell your home.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not like an absolute deal breaker. You could still, which makes sense. If you can sell your house for more than it's worth or more than you owe to the bank, then
pay all the fees, all that stuff.
Yep. And the bank would really prefer that because they don't want it, because it costs them a lot to have it maintained and the yard done, and they have people clean it a couple times a month, and so it's a lot of additional expenses. So if you can sell it, they prefer that. Plus, it's going to save you because they're going to add all those fees onto what you owe.
Well, because I know when I'm sitting there at the closing table with buyers, a lot of times, you know, when we're closing at the bank, the lender tells the buyer, hey, if you run into difficulties, call us. We would much rather work with you than do exactly what you just
So people get scared because I've had people where I'll say, have you called the bank? And they're like, no, if I call, they're going to want money. But you might even be able to work out where you can make a half a payment or an interest payment just to avoid that foreclosure, because they really don't want to take that house back.
So what would you say, okay, I think maybe you actually touched on it, but jog my memory. So what's kind of the average time period from when that foreclosure notice is sent to when, unfortunately, it's a completely done deal, you're out of the house, the bank has now posted the, I don't know what you'd call it, ownership letter, something on that front door. A lot of times when we're out showing, we'll walk up to a house, there's something posted on the door. What's that general timeline?
It depends on the bank and how far behind the people are, but usually from the time if you see the notice on the door, that means they are within the redemption period, so they've already had the sheriff's sale, so they are within that final 90 days. And because once they have the sheriff's sale, then the bank's going to start sending somebody to check on the property to make sure it's maintained. If they're still in there, the people are allowed to stay through that 90 days. If they're not, and it's considered abandoned, then the bank will change locks, they'll turn utilities in their name. So then the people really have no access back to the home.
Okay. So, yeah, long, complicated process, even though you're sitting here with us. So, okay, so to switch gears a little bit, so obviously that's kind of the seller side of things. Buyers. So, how do buyers find out about foreclosures in general?
There are a lot of different websites you can go to. I mean, a lot of people want to go to Zillow because Zillow is like
the pre-foreclosure. Like, how accurate is that for people?
A lot of times you'll get that pre-foreclosure, and that means maybe they have missed a payment or two, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to go into foreclosure.
Or it could just be a wrong address. Haven't you
had
those?
Yep. We've had some where it's been the wrong address, or it might have been a pre-foreclosure and the house might have sold before it actually got to foreclosure, and somebody else owns it now, but Zillow has not updated to show that. So, I mean, that's not the most accurate. Your best bet, each entity like Fannie Mae, HUD, and VA have websites that you can go to. But your best bet is to get a hold of an agent. Give me a call, of course.
Right, true.
Called on.
Yep.
And then that way we can kind of keep you up to date on the list.
Okay. Well, because I know every Friday you actually update your list and you essentially publish it, you know, so if people, because we do have buyers who are looking specifically for foreclosures. We also have the traditional buyer who we're out looking, they have their price range, and we may notice, oh, hey, this one is on the MLS, but it's actually a foreclosure. But if someone's looking specifically for that, Dawn's obviously your go-to.
Dawn's where we go to a lot of times when we have questions.
So is it fair to say a lot of the people who are looking specifically for a foreclosure are investors?
Quite a few are. It depends. I mean, like when I get a listing in Clay Center, I have a couple of investors up there that I know I can just call and they'll buy. I have a couple in Junction City that I know will just buy. So it kind of depends on what the area is. With Fannie Mae, an investor cannot buy for the first 21 days. Because Fannie Mae has this big push after the big housing market burst that they want to try to get people back into homes. So if you're an investor, you can make an offer, but they will not, it will be rejected and they will just hold it until after that 21 days just so they can try to get homeowners back in. So if you're a homeowner, you have a better chance of getting an offer accepted before an investor.
Okay, so they start with the homeowners, then they open it up to the investors. Okay. Are foreclosures typically, you know, a steal, a bargain? Like, walk us through that.
It depends on the foreclosure. Some of them are a pretty good deal. I mean, I've had some where they're priced way below the appraised value. Other ones, it's market value. I work a lot with Fannie Mae. They do have an appraisal done. They have to sell it for fair market value because they can't just take a loss and then try to go back on the owner and say, well, hey, I sold your $200,000 house for $50,000 and you still owe us money. So they do have to try to sell it for fair market value. They will list it at the market price, but they reduce them a lot quicker than a normal seller would.
Okay.
So for buyers that are wanting to buy, so do they have to just have cash, or what type of financing options
cash
do they
is
have?
always fantastic. We love cash.
Right.
If you do cash, though, they do require 10% down of whatever the purchase price is, and they can close as quick as 10 days on a cash deal. You just have to have a proof of funds letter, but they will finance, of course, if the house will pass. I mean, some homes will, some won't. Or a lot of times I've had people do construction loans so they can go in and fix them up. So you can
rehab
finance
the house
property,
before you
right.
move in. That's,
Yeah.
it needs work. That's
I've
probably
done
a really
several
good
in the
option.
last year that are like the FHA rehab loans, and those work out really well.
Yeah.
Okay. That would
Nice
make
for
sense.
the people, yeah. Just that gets the house move-in ready, which, as we know, is so important. So.
Right.
Now, for buyers who are, considering a foreclosure, what happens if they have another house they need to sell in order to buy the foreclosure?
Most of the time, I would say 99.99%, the banks will not take a contingency sale because they don't want to take that foreclosure off the market because they're still paying for maintenance every month and lawn mowing and cleaning. And if it takes 6 months to sell, it costs them more. So they might have agreed on a set price, but then by the time the other house sells and it closes, they've lost money for the maintaining the home. So they will not take a contingency sale. It used to be that they would if a home was already under contract, but I had one of those this year and they still rejected it. So I actually called and they said they just won't do that anymore.
Okay. So if you're wanting to buy that foreclosure, you got to be able to buy it free and clear, whether it's through financing or the cash option. You said you can close fairly quickly with cash. Now, if you are financing, how in control are you of closing as a buyer?
Most of the banks like 30 to 45 days. You can do an extension. They will not do it. Like I've had some banks come back and we're 2 weeks in the process and they're like, oh, we need another 30 days. And most of the time the bank will say, well, let's wait till we get to that point. Sometimes they end up getting it done and it closes on time, but most of them will do extensions. So it's not just a hurry up or you're going to lose it. But most of the time closing is 30 to 45 days.
Okay, so similar to a traditional sale, but you're just kind of working through two banks, essentially. The bank that owns the house and one that you're financing.
Right. And they still, I mean, it's kind of like a typical transaction. They still have the right to do inspections. Most of the time, like with Fannie Mae, they'll say it's for informational purposes only. But if there are lender required repairs, then we can negotiate those. Okay. They prefer, though, one little thing is if it's not required by your lender, you might ask them to pay closing costs or to reduce the price. Because I know, like with Fannie Mae, I have to get 2 estimates for repairs. Then they have to be approved. And normally from the time we get a repair request to the time it gets approved or denied, it sometimes is like 3 weeks, so it can hold up a closing.
Delay,
Okay.
So a lot of times I tell people if it's not required by the lender and it's just something you want, you're better off to ask them to pay closing costs or reduce the price or something just so it doesn't hold things up.
Okay. So that's something to be aware of, though, as a buyer, that if you have to be in a property by a certain date, maybe reconsider a foreclosure. Maybe it's not the best fit because there's a few things that are just out of everyone's control and have to kind of go through the proper channels. Okay. Let's say you are a buyer and you think, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. Things keep getting delayed. Now you're essentially finding yourself homeless. Can you move in early? Will the bank let?
They don't do that just because there's not a guarantee that it will close, and because then they are still paying because they always keep an attorney and everything on retainer.
Okay.
So they will not let you move in early. There is chances, though, like if you are the seller and you're in foreclosure and you have nowhere to go, an owner can rent back from the bank. I've had that a couple times. Which is crazy to me because I'm like, well, they haven't made their payment, but you're going to trust them to pay rent?
Right.
Yeah. So, but I have had that happen a couple times in the last couple years. Or if you are a tenant, I always feel bad when I go and it's a tenant and they've been sending their rent to the owner, but the owner's not been paying it.
Mortgage,
And then they argue with me that, no, I've paid my rent, but the owner hasn't paid it. So then I always feel bad, but they will let that tenant stay until the home sells too. And if the tenant wants to buy, the tenant will get the first option to buy the home if they want to buy it.
Oh, that's actually kind of cool
Yeah.
because we know working with tenants in general, we always feel awful when the house is up for sale.
Yeah.
Because tenants have rights, you
Right.
know. But then I hadn't even thought about the tenant factor, and you find out the house is in foreclosure, and
Especially when you've been paying
When
your
you've been
your-
paying
Uh-huh.
your rent,
and
Yeah.
you trust that, you know, the owner is paying it as well.
exactly.
and then you wonder why the seller's been to Hawaii 3 times.
Yeah.
Yep, that answers the question. So, and then watching this, we do have one question. The funny
Kelby.
part of this carpool karaoke, we were actually going to do a cash cab concept, but we found that the bumps in our streets made it really awful to try to watch. And then we thought, well, maybe we'll do
didn't-
Dollar Durango or something.
we didn't want everybody to get dizzy.
No, we did not want to make it hard for you guys to watch, but we did have that thought, you know,
Yeah.
go with carpool karaoke or cash cab. So didn't happen, but nonetheless, I think Dawn answered quite a few
Yeah.
questions. If you guys have any other questions, like I would say probably next 5 seconds, go ahead, type them in. But we know, obviously, before we sign off, we just want to say congratulations to the men's basketball team.
Yeah,
Huge
definitely.
win last night. The women are playing again. We had the NIT
Tonight.
just down on the other side of the quad
They're in the third
from us.
round.
Yep. And then obviously we're playing again this weekend on the men's note. This weekend, for all you people who want to get out and actually enjoy the weather instead of sitting in front of the TV, it is the Friends of the Zoo this weekend. Free admission, I think I heard.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, pretty big deal. So, I hope you got. Oh, thanks for the compliments on our earrings. So, yeah, glad we could be very entertaining for you guys. But anyhow, see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.